Welcome. It's so nice to see you all on an early Saturday morning. I'd be in my bathrobe if I wasn't here. So I am very appreciative of all of you coming. We're here to talk about audiobooks, and it's called Are You Listening? Audiobooks and Links to Learning. And it's an HPL Academy. We do occasional workshops at the library. They are meant to be learning opportunities for the entire community. So thank you for coming to this one. We're glad to see you. And we'll roll along very shortly. I want to introduce the players this morning. I'm Sharon Grover. I'm the head of youth services here at Hedberg Public Library. This is my good friend, Liz Hannegan, and she is a library education consultant. She's retired. She and I worked together in Arlington, Virginia. She was the public school librarian. I was the public library librarian. And we started working on audiobook projects together, and we'll get to that a little bit later. And sitting right in front there is Cassandra Campbell, and she is a narrator. And I see we have more people. Brian, could you let them know that they can come in here? Thank you. She is a wonderful narrator, and she is going to share some of her. There it goes again. What we hope you'll take away from today is learning how literacy skills are enhanced by listening to audiobooks. There actually is research that shows that this is true. Discovering how to evaluate audiobooks so that you know what you're listening for if you're in a school or a public library, or even at home. You want to make sure you're choosing the best when you're listening. Hopefully we're doing that for you. Oops. And understanding how listening can pair up with Common Core standards. And those of you who are homeschool parents might wonder why I'm talking about Common Core standards. The school people are not wondering at all why I'm talking about Common Core standards, because they're new standards that have been adopted by the state, by many states. But I would say that if you had to boil down what Common Core standards are really about, they are about critical thinking and collaborative inquiry. And by that I mean looking for things together, finding things out together. And that's, to me, what homeschool is all about. You care that your kids are critical, learn critical thinking skills, and you work together as families. So to me, it's very seamless, and it all works together. And hopefully by the end, you'll think it does too. So,
my turn.
Your turn.
All right, how we became. Now, I have a pretty big voice, and we're being recorded, but I'm assuming you can hear me. My husband calls it my teacher voice, because I was always directing to the back of the room. Sharon was working in the Arlington, Virginia Public Library, and I was working in the Arlington Public Schools. And if you can imagine, not in Janesville, but perhaps in Los Angeles, where Cassandra lives, to get to work was a major feat on a daily basis. And the traffic was terrible. And Sharon and I, as we had started to work together in a middle school with a group of students reading and discussing good books, we discovered, she said, you know, you really should listen to audiobooks when you're driving back and forth in your commute. And I said, oh, I'll try it. Well, I came back a couple of weeks later and I said, I can't do it. I can't drive and listen to a story. I'm all over, you know, I'm getting distracted. I'm getting caught up in the story. I can't do this. And she said, well, okay, leave it for a while. Well, the rest is history. I don't know why I persisted, but it is a learned activity. And driving while listening to good audiobooks became an obsession and saved my commute for about the last 15 years I was working. So as that evolved, because I was a research librarian for the school system, I started looking into research that supported using audiobooks for listening and the skills that would be developed. And the skills that the most interesting were reading comprehension is increased fluency, because when you hear the spoken word, it is modeled of how the language should sound. And then it just all flows together. Test scores, the dreaded test scores, indicate that children who listen to audiobooks as well as read, that it transfers to reading comprehension and to increased skill in reading print. So, I'm going to step aside and you take the next.
Oh, okay.
You might,
All right. So, Liz did all this research, and she wasn't quite listening yet. And she got a grant for $85,000 to put audiobooks into the libraries at all of the Title I elementary and middle schools in Arlington. And then she said, oh, we should do a presentation on this. And I said, okay. And she said, you better read the research. Look, there are two teachers, well, several teachers in the audience here. I thought I might die, actually, reading this research. And then I kind of got caught up in it. And she turned me into a curriculum junkie. I have actually read the entire English Language Arts Common Core, not all of the appendices, but the main body of it, I've read it. I won't go so far as to quote pieces of it to you because that would be kind of boring. And then when we were putting together the presentation, Liz said, I suppose our conversation around these would be better if I actually listened to some. And I said, yeah, maybe. And so she did. She started with A Step from Heaven. And she called me up when she got home and she said, I've been weeping in the car. And I said, yeah, I know. So, one of the things that the research showed is that not only is listening a skill that improves all of the benefits for struggling readers, English language learners, but it also is good for proficient readers because, as some of my friends here will tell you later, it makes you slow down. When you read, oftentimes you tend to skim. When you listen, you have no choice but to hear every single word that author wrote. And it increases a lot of the same kinds of skills for good readers as it does for readers who struggle to read. So, moving on.
well, here they are, the dreaded but very interesting Common Core state standards. As Sharon mentioned briefly, these standards have been adopted nationwide for, I think right now, 48 of the 50 states. And so consequently, they have meaning across the country. Wisconsin has adopted the Common Core state standards. So what Sharon has done for this presentation is you will see, as we talk about some individual audiobooks, that not only do we use a Common Core state standard, but also a performance standard for Wisconsin. So that really puts it all together. There's something that we didn't mention earlier I refer to it as a package that we have developed with using audiobooks. We listen to an audiobook, say, historical fiction, that would work in 7th grade social studies. Let's see what we can do with that. Then we read the standards, and we see that there is a Common Core state standard that fits right with that grade level and that subject and that curriculum topic. Then we add in what we fondly call an instructional extension, that after a student or a class has listened to this would be an activity for instruction that you might want to do. And one thing we did not put up here, that is an important characteristic of the package, and that is that we keep up. We listen to the most current audiobooks and search for ones that really have a theme for student learning. Not just Charlotte's Web that we all love. It is a fabulous audiobook narrated by E.B. White himself, but the newest things, because audiobook production in this day and age is just fantastic, and you will hear proof of that from Nick and from Cassandra later on. I started to do something here. And now Ms. Broker talks about how do you know that it's an outstanding audiobook?
Well, the first thing you need to consider is whether it's something that needed to be recorded to begin with. Some things just do not lend themselves to being read aloud. And generally speaking, if a book has a strong narrative pull, then it does lend itself to being read aloud. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
I saw her looking at me. I thought, well, I hope I'm not saying the wrong thing. When you look at how it's narrated, is it fully voiced, which some of you have listened to Harry Potter or other books that are fully voiced. The narrator creates a specific, distinct voice for each character in the book. Maybe it's partially voiced. Some of the characters have distinct voices. Other characters are delineated by pacing or inflection. Maybe it's multiple voices. We have a couple of instances of those. Or two voices. Maybe there's a boy and a girl, and there's a woman and a man narrating. So that's the kind of thing you look for. You might wonder if it's read by an actor or if it's read by the author. Occasionally, authors make good narrators. I don't want to show my bias here, but they, they're the most familiar with what they've written, and sometimes that brings something extra and wonderful to the presentation of the audiobook, but not always, because they, it'd be like listening to me read an audiobook. My pacing and inflection would not be top drawer, and sometimes theirs isn't either. But sometimes they are just really good at it. Neil Gaiman is really good at it. Sherman Alexie will show you a little clip later from The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. He's amazing. I can't imagine anybody else having read that story. So that's the kind of thing you listen to. Is the voicing culturally authentic? And to me, this is critically important. I don't want to hear somebody reading a Spanish person's speech sounding either like they're breaking their teeth over it or like, I don't know what. I listened to an audiobook and I won't give you the name. It takes place in South Africa in one of the small townships. It's about the terrible AIDS epidemic there and how it affects children. And the narrator, there was a picture on the box, the narrator both looked and sounded like my 15-year-old, very Wisconsin granddaughter. To say that it took away from the story is an understatement. So I think that culturally authentic narration is very important. Are you going to give an example?
I am.
Excellent, because she does fabulous French. So that's something that I always listen for when I'm evaluating an audiobook. And then, people wonder if there's a difference between fiction and nonfiction. Well, that's where that narrative pull comes in. There's strong narrative pull in a lot of nonfiction these days. People are really making it into stories because stories are becoming very important. Even big Fortune 500 companies are discovering that being able to sell their product by telling a story is very important. Just giving those dry data facts doesn't cut it anymore. People want to hear that story. So the best nonfiction in audio is one that does a good story. Sometimes with nonfiction, there's a lot of illustrative material that goes along with it, photographs, maps, drawings. And then it might be nice to have the books near you so that you could look at these things as you're listening. And now we're moving right along to the part where we're going to put together the audiobooks, the standards, the instructional extension, which to me I think of as the fun thing you get to do after you read the book. So we're starting with K2 and moving on through 12. And the first one we're going to talk about is 5 Creatures by Emily Jenkins and Tomek Bogacki. It's narrated by Kristen Hahn, and it's really fun, and it's one where it's math, and that's sometimes hard to find in an audiobook. And I have to confess that it's one of my favorite books, period. And then when they made it into an audiobook, I thought, wow, this is so cool, because it has really cool sound effects and some music. And the narrator really sounds like a little girl. Little girl is telling you in her house about the 5 creatures who live there. Mom, a dad, a little girl, and 2 cats. And she groups them into categories. One of the Common Core standards for classifying objects into categories and counting the number of objects. One of the things that the illustrator, Tomek Bogacki, does that makes it even more interesting is you can kind of see up there that diamond shape that they're in. He has created the illustrations into Venn diagrams. So not only is the text sorting all of these creatures, it's making them into Venn diagrams through the use of the illustration. And let me tell you, there are hardly any books that do Venn diagrams, K through 2. I'm going to play a little clip so you can hear it. And then we'll move on. Maybe
5 creatures live in our house. 3 humans and 2 cats. 3 short and 2 tall. 4 grown-ups and 1 child. That's me. 3 with orange hair and 2 with gray. 2 with long hair. 3 with short. 4 who like to eat fish. 3 who like to drink milk. 1 who's allergic. And 1 who has it only in coffee.
So you can see what the music and the sound effects add, a certain amount of charm, but also a pacing to the story, so that children who are just beginning to read can have time to look at the illustrations, to get that information that you get from the illustration, have time to turn the page. Very often in read-alongs, and there's a bunch of them on the back table, there's a page turn signal on one track and no page turn signal on the other track. But this is no page turn signals because I didn't think we'd want to listen to them. But you can hear where they're giving children time to read the illustrations, to see which way the text is going, without needing to spend all of their time decoding. And what could be better as an instructional extension than a video game? Kids love them. Lots of public schools have kid picks. We have kid picks here at the library. And also Zoologic, PBS Kids, is that sorting and categorizing. And on kid picks, they actually get to create Venn diagrams. So that I thought that would be kind of a fun extension for kids to do, where you could actually let them have some of that screen time, and it wouldn't be a bad thing. And we talked a little bit before about cultural authenticity and the need for cultural authenticity. And the Common Core standards actually speak to that, to learning about diverse culture. Century Skills Standards also talk about global learning. And this is a very fun story. It's an old Cuban folktale about La Cucaracha Martina. And now you know why I don't read this. But Carmen Agrediti, who is a storyteller, writer, speaker, does a fabulous job with this. She does a whole host of very funny voices. And this is the story of Martina the Cockroach, who is going off in search of a husband. And she gets some very unusual advice from her grandmother. It's also, while I'm trying to see the cursor, which has disappeared. Maybe there it is. It also has one track that's just read in Spanish, so that's kind of nice too for schools or homes.
Martina Josefina Catalina Cucaracha was a beautiful cockroach. She lived in a cozy street lamp in Old Havana with her big, lovable family. Now that Martina was 21 days old, she was ready to give her leg in marriage. The Cucaracha household was crawling with excitement. Every señora in the family had something to offer. Tia Cuca gave her una peineta, a seashell comb. Mama gave her una mantilla, a lace shawl. But Abuela, her Cuban grandmother, gave her un consejo increíble, some shocking advice. You want me to do what? Martina was aghast. You are a beautiful cockroach, said Abuela. Finding husbands to choose from will be easy. Picking the right one could be tricky. But, stammered Martina. How will spilling coffee on his suitor's juice help me find a good husband? Her grandmother smiled. It will make him angry. Then you'll know how he will speak to you when he loses his temper. Trust me, Martina. The coffee test never fails.
So you can see from the performance standard here that the Common Core really does have great relationship to what went on before. Really, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. School teachers, librarians have been doing this all the time. You just need to mesh them together. And, you know, you do it at home all the time as well when you're teaching your kids. It's nothing new. And if you want to have some fun with this book, the website beautifulmartina.com talks about the history of the story, because it really is a very old story, but also gives lots of good information to go along with the cultural part of learning about Cuba. Analysis is true.
All right. Moving to grades 3 through 5 is a little bit of a transition. So in this grouping, we're going to continue to use a read-along, but also an early chapter book, which indicates that the students in these grades are transitioning to more complex themes. The first one, which also gives an example of something that we like to do, really current titles. This one is brand new, Night Flight by Robert Burley. See what Cassandra said? I have a granola bar and I'm nervously tweaking it and it's crinkling. That's worse than breathing. Written by Robert Burley and illustrated by Wendell Miner. The illustrations add a layer that is just wonderful. Narrated by Laura Hamilton. As you can see, without me reading, this is fits to a Common Core standard about a character or a setting. And as you can see from the cover, this is a story of Amelia Earhart flying from Newfoundland to Ireland in 1932 in a single-engine plane. The flight took 2,000 miles and 15 hours. The sound effects in this story are just wonderful. You hear the propeller, you hear the tension of what happens on this flight. I was just, as you can tell, I'm an older person, and this is for a young listener, and I was just grasped by the drama that happens during the flight, because she runs into all sorts of trouble. So, cursor on here is a clip for you to listen to and see if you can pick up the drama.
The Vega struggles. It grows sluggish. There is ice on the wings. The plane reels under the ice's weight, pitching sideways. Suddenly it spins, dipping and dizzying. Everything she has ever learned courses through her blood. Now or never. All or nothing. She tenses up as the plane nosedives downward. She must accelerate to gain control.
Well, as you can tell, she did make it, but you get caught up. You're not quite certain. Even though at the end of the story she arrives in Ireland, even to the sound of cows mooing in the pasture, while this story is being read and you're listening to it, you're not quite sure that she will. A really good read-along frequently includes an afterword, and one thing that's really nice about this one is that there is biographical information about Amelia Earhart and some of her aviation records timeline in the back of the book, which makes a good starting point for further research for students. Here's your performance standards, and I went looking for something that might, because early aviation is just filled with just incredible facts, and it makes you wonder that how they ever did it. So I went to the Library of Congress. It's a website beyond compare, and they had an aviation timeline and a history of flight just in a nice continuum, and it had many, many firsts of Amelia Earhart. So here's your package of Common Core, a new title, something that fits into history and social studies. The next one for grades 3 through 5 is a chapter book. And it's an interesting one that Sharon and I had used before because it is a full cast audio. This is a story of the westward movement, and let me see what it says exactly. Of a family that moves to Oklahoma in the land rush, and then the westward movement includes the coming of the rail lines, the trains, and they are the people who own the train line are threatening to bypass their town, and they don't want that. They want the train to stop. Is that right? Stop here.
The train.
Stop it. So. This is a full cast audio, and that every character has a different voice, and it makes it fun. In fact, this is not just a historical fiction story. It also is funny. Down to the name of the main character is a tongue twister. If I can do it, Sissy Sisney is her name. And it's very quirky and a lot of fun. So let's listen to part of Stop the Train.
The news struck the people of Florence like a runaway locomotive plowing into their midst. Men sat down on the ground where they were Blask Warboys looked around for her children and hugged her ugly baby close. Hildy Sisney gave her husband a shove on the shoulder.
Thanking you very kindly, Hulbert Sisney. Didn't I say we should have sold while we had the chance?
You figure he's open to negotiation?
Asked Emil Clem of the young man on the cart. Nathaniel shook his head.
Red Rock Rim? My father is incapable of changing his mind. Once he has said a thing, it is carved in stone.
Like the law of the Medes and Persians,
said Monday morning under his breath.
In that case, I say we shoot his boy,
suggested Virgil Hobbs, pulling out a pistol and waving it in the general direction of Nathaniel Rim. Emil Clem, who had appointed himself temporary sheriff, waited in between and cautioned against it.
You never want to shoot a man whose kin can afford lawyers.
It's a truism. So obviously connected with the United States history. Before we talked about with Night Flight using the Library of Congress website, in this one I thought that it would be interesting to indicate how local resources that are online can be so useful for student research and studying. It's about the Oklahoma land rush and the westward movement. So the Oklahoma Historical Society had a wealth of information about the growth of trains, about the growth of the communities, etc. So start locally before you go to the familiar. And then it just so happened that Sharon and I were in La Crosse the other day, and so I went to the La Crosse Historical Society, and even though La Crosse is in Wisconsin, it had a lot of information about the westward expansion and even a small bit about the trains. So that just fits to make the package. Well, Sharon and I negotiated a little bit on grades 6 through 8 because, if the truth be told, we first met 20 years ago, and we met in a middle school because in our introductions we didn't talk too much about what we did in an earlier life, but I was an elementary school librarian for 9 years, and then middle school for 5 years, and then they thought that I was grown up enough that I was the district supervisor for my county for the school libraries, and Sharon was with the public library. We met in middle school and ran a book discussion group for grades 6, 7, and 8, and discovered that we were very compatible in our ideas about literature, and even back then we did some listening. So we fight over sometimes who's going to do middle school titles, because it is a personal favorite. So, but I got to do this one because OK for Now has several specific things that I particularly like. Number one, it's a new title. Number two, it is written, the author is one of my personal favorite authors, Gary Schmidt, and also narrated by a narrator that I really enjoy, Lincoln Hopper. And I was, as was Sharon, I was on the Odyssey chair last year for 2012, and this is an Odyssey 2012 honor book. Gary Schmidt creates a cast of characters and a story that is both poignant and funny. That's pretty hard to combine. There is an underlayer of sadness in this book, but at the same time you're smiling. The story is about 8th grader Doug Zryatek, who moves to upstate New York. He fondly refers to it as stupid Marysville with his family. It's set in 1968. His brother Lucas is in Vietnam, so a little bit of layering of time and place. It's not a good time for the family. They've moved because times are hard, and all of a sudden, Doug is not happy in this new place. He wants to be back where they moved from the Manhattan or Long Island area, but the metropolitan area to upstate. And Doug is not happy. But one day, he goes to the library. Yes. Because he was just desperate. What could he do in stupid Marysville? But he goes to the library and he discovers that upstairs in the library there is this special display. And when he discovers this display, his whole life takes another direction. That's all I'll say for right now. Let Lincoln speak to you as Doug himself.
I went over to the table to see how come it was the only lousy thing in the whole lousy room. And right away, I knew why. Underneath the glass was this book. A huge book. A huge, huge book. Its pages were longer than a good-sized baseball bat. I'm not lying. And on the whole page, there was only one picture. Of a bird. I couldn't take my eyes off it. He was all alone. And he looked like he was falling out of the sky and into this cold green sea. His wings were back. His tail feathers were back. And his neck was pulled around as if he was trying to turn but couldn't. His eye was round and bright and afraid. And his beak was open a little bit, probably because he was trying to suck in some air before he crashed into the water. The sky around him was dark, like the air was too heavy to fly in. This bird was falling, and there wasn't a single thing in the world that cared at all. It was the most terrifying picture I had ever seen. The most beautiful. I leaned down into the glass, close to the bird. I think I started to breathe a little bit more quickly since the glass fogged up and I had to wipe the wet away. But I couldn't help it. Dang, he was so alone. He was so scared.
As you can imagine, if you've deduced from that, it's when Doug discovers the Audubon portfolio, and every week the portfolio is changed to a different bird, and it just opens up two things for him. The beauty of the birds, but he discovers that he has a talent, and that talent is drawing. And it's just very heartwarming. It truly is. The natural extension for this would be for students if they're to learn more about Audubon and about birds. So here is a link to the National Audubon Society, and the Audubon's portfolio at the University of Pittsburgh shows you all of these incredibly painted birds that Audubon did. So now Ms. Grover gets to do the second.
So the next one is Dead End in Norvelt, written and narrated by Jack Gantos, the 2012 Newbery Award winner. We talked a bit about authors as narrators, and Jack Gantos often narrates his own stuff. And interestingly enough, here's my notes here, so I can remember what I was going to tell you. He is not a perfect narrator. He doesn't breathe in the right places. His pacing sometimes is a little bit off. But he so embodies the characters he writes about that you forgive everything when you listen. And he really is great. For those of, how many of you have read this? You guys. No kids. Just grown-ups. Okay. He's grounded for life 2 weeks into summer vacation in 1962. And, of course, that ruins his entire summer. And his mother lends him out to a very elderly neighbor who writes the obituaries for the local papers. But she has very bad arthritis in her hands, so she can't type anymore. And Jack gets to do the typing for her. And beyond being the story of Jack and how he makes his summer bearable by reading historical fiction, it's also the story of the town that the real Jack Gantos grew up in, Norvelt, Pennsylvania, which is a planned community. During the New Deal, before World War II, Eleanor Roosevelt was very instrumental in building a lot of planned communities where the houses were built to certain specifications. And they were made for people who couldn't afford fancy houses to have something to get started in. And there was usually some kind of place to work in those communities as well. So it tells the story of that and of the very, very worthy people who inhabit the town of Norvelt. So let's listen to this.
School was finally out, and I was standing on a picnic table in our backyard getting ready for a great summer vacation when my mother walked up to me and ruined it. I was holding a pair of camouflage Japanese World War II binoculars to my eyes and focusing across her newly planted vegetable garden and her cornfield and over ancient Miss Volker's roof and then up the Norvelt Road and past the brick bell tower on my school and beyond the community center and the tall silver whistle on top of the volunteer fire department to the most distant dark blue hill, which is where the screen for the Viking Drive-In movie theater had recently been erected.
So the Common Core standard that I chose for this one is analyzing how particular elements of a story or drama interact, how setting shapes the characters or plot. And the setting of Norvelt, Pennsylvania really drives how this story is set up. And it pairs really well with that. Historical, social, and cultural themes in literary works, great performance standard for this. And instructional standards, we couldn't help ourselves. We couldn't just pick one. Extension. There's really some interesting information about New Deal planned communities and Norvelt in particular at these two URLs. And by the way, this PowerPoint presentation will be on the website, so you'll be able to link to all of these things. And then Gantos himself gives a great interview at Reading Rocket's website. And then there's the Newbery. Most of the more recent Newberries have been for kind of a middle school age. And have your kids pick some great stuff right from that page and see what it's all about. And now it's his turn again. It really is a dog and pony show.
For high school, it was kind of easy. It really was, because this absolutely true diary of a part-time Indian won so many awards several years ago that it could take a little bit of time to announce them all. It was the 2009 Odyssey Medal winner. It was the 2007 National Book Award for Young People's Literature. And it also is another example of an author who narrates his own work. Sherman Alexie is not only an author, he's also a poet. And he is lyrical in his language expression. It's just wonderful. And he takes on the persona. This is a semi-autobiographical story of Junior. He is Junior, and he is created through the audio performance. Every time you read this book, if you hear Sherman Alexie, he is Junior. And Junior is a Spokane Indian who lives on the reservation, and he does not have a very good life. He's a teenager. There's alcoholism, there's violence, etc. But he has a resilience in him that he knows he wants to do something different, to be something different. And there's hope. But when you hear in a minute how his life began, it becomes even more dramatic. And this is his expression of how it was from him when he was just a babe. There we go.
I was born with water on the brain. Okay, so that's not exactly true. I was actually born with too much cerebrospinal fluid inside my skull. But cerebrospinal fluid is just the doctor's fancy way of saying brain grease. And brain grease works inside the lobes like car grease works inside an engine. It keeps things running smooth and fast. But weirdo me, I was born with too much grease inside my skull, and it got all thick and muddy and disgusting, and it only mucked up the works. My thinking and breathing and living engines slowed down and flooded. My brain was drowning in grease. But that makes the whole thing sound weirdo and funny, like my brain was a giant French fry. So it seems more serious and poetic and accurate to say I was born with water on the brain.
Compare and describe similarities and differences in the ways various cultures define individual rights and responsibilities. And the core of this story is in Junior's individual journey. It's just very, very, very powerful. In Wisconsin, there are various Native American tribes. In the east, where I live, there are the Eastern Woodland Native Americans. But Junior comes from Spokane, so I did choose to focus on the Spokane Indian tribe for the instructional extension, particularly comparing tribal information that is on the website versus Sherman Alexie's viewpoint in his novel. That would be fertile ground to compare. Next.
So, the other one we chose for high school is Here in Harlem. You know this book? Ms. Hildebrand? You should.
Oh, I'm going to know.
Yeah. This is a very lively, authentic, poetic tribute to Harlem, particularly harking back to the Harlem Renaissance. It's by Walter Dean Myers, who is the current ambassador for children's literature. And his main focus for this year is reading is not an option. Everybody needs to be reading. And this is also a multiple voiced audiobook, although we're only going to hear one voice. But the sound effects, the music that's been composed for this really lifts the book to another level. You would want to have the book near you because it has fabulous photographs of period Harlem in it, but it's really great. The introduction is read by Myers, who is not a great reader, but everybody loves him so much. And there are memorable collections of characters here, from Delia Pierce, age 32, a hairdresser, to Homer Grimes, age 83, a blind war veteran. The reading is interspersed with jazz and street sounds, and it's a wonderful production. So let's listen to a little bit from it.
Everybody's asking me why I'm always talking about Harlem. Well, child, to me, Harlem is like an old friend. Sometimes she won't do right, or do exactly what you want her to do. Sometimes she's needy when you don't have anything extra to be giving. But you know what to expect from a real friend. And that's what Harlem has been to me. And if you give to Harlem, it always finds a way to give back. When I hear music coming from the apartment windows or from the doors of a storefront church, I know that's Harlem giving me a gift. And it's music that's more than just head music. It's music my soul remembers from way past what my brain knows about. I love the people of Harlem, too. Yes, that's right. All of them. Because one by one, they may not be that much. But honey, all together, they're Harlem. And you can't ask for more than that.
This won the 2011 Audie Award for Distinguished Achievement in an Audio Book. It's very well deserved. It's a brilliant production. And then to learn more about Harlem, you can go to the Columbia University Harlem History webpage. And because we are librarians, and we would, as a friend of mine once said, chase after someone who had 10 books in their arms, yelling, "But wait, I have more!" We have more. And we'll just run through these really quickly. I picked this one because in Janesville they do a penguin project, which is quite dear to my heart. And the essential question is, if you had a penguin come to your classroom, could you keep it? Would you be able to keep a penguin alive in your classroom? And of course, in the end, the answer is no. But I've been told by some teachers that there are tears when they discover that they can't keep a penguin in the classroom. But here is a penguin that lives in this little boy's house. And I thought, I'm just going to share a quick, maybe, there we go, a quick clip from this.
At the aquarium, Elliot's father settled on a bench to read his National Geographic. "Have some fun, Elliot," he said. So Elliot did. He skipped the mobs of kids at the giant saltwater tank, amazing jellies display, and hands-on tide pool exhibit. At the end of the hall, he discovered penguins in their tidy black feather tuxedos with their proper posture. They reminded Elliot of himself.
So Elliot takes the penguin home in his backpack, and it's quite funny from here on out. The illustrations by David Small are just incredible. I mean, text is, for such a young age group, pretty sophisticated. So it's really nice to have an audio edition of it. Truly Winnie is a very fun beginning chapter book, and we have it in our in-between collection. And Winnie is a little girl who goes to camp, and you get all of the familiar camp routines: swimming, chores, crafts, bunk mates that maybe you like or maybe you don't. And then it also intertwines with themes of friendship. Winnie's mother has died fairly recently, and so she's now living in a single-parent family. And that makes her different from all of her friends. And how does she figure out who she is, and how does she tell the truth about it, which comes to the truly Winnie part. As a kid said once, she lies in this book. And she does, but she learns not to. So it's all very instructive. And then there's more books after this one: Winnie Dancing on Her Own, and Winnie at Her Best. And Winnie is perfect for 3rd, 4th grade. And now I'll give it to Liz.
Because it's grade 6 through 8. And Sharon always does Truly Winning. When we separate these out, she does Truly Winning because she personally knows the author, Jennifer Richard Jacobson, and they have a very good time conversing. So there's no way around it. You always have your favorites. And this is one of my favorites because, once again, it was a 2012 Odyssey honor. It's called Ghetto Cowboy, and the narration by J.D. Jackson is just fabulous. This is a story of a young African-American boy whose mother has I think he's 13, and his name is Cole, and he was named for the jazz great Coltrane. But he's Cole. He's never met his father. He's never known his father, and his mother and he live in Detroit. And she has had enough. And so she takes him to Philadelphia to meet his father, and that he's going to spend the summer with his father because he's gotten in a little bit of trouble, and she wants a different perspective. So Cole is not happy meeting his father for the first time and being shuttled off to Philadelphia. But what he finds out is his father is an urban cowboy in the sense that, based on history, this is based on historical fact of African American cowboys in cities. In fact, when Sharon and I were doing our research on this story, we found out that there was it a video and audio clip of an interview. It was an audio clip with a real urban cowboy, I think in New York. So there were enclaves, we know, in Philadelphia and in New York City, of these African Americans who kept horses and tried to save them from abuse situations, etc. So this is just a wonderful, I don't have a clip, I wish I did have one for you this morning, but put this on your list of a great listen for a teenage boy's journey of self-discovery. Okay. Aha.
And I don't have a clip of this one either, but when we put them on the website, I'll add clips in for all of these. This is Buddha Boy by Kathy Koja, another from the full cast audio, high school, and it's about bullying, and that's such a problem now in high schools that in all schools, actually, you can't open the newspaper without seeing things about bullying. And this is the story of a young boy who is starting high school, and he's paired with the weird kid who is called Buddha Boy. His name is Jinsen, and he has adopted a Buddhist mentality for himself because, as you find out later, of things that happened in his past. And Justin really doesn't want to be standing out because then the bullies will notice him, and it's about how they learn to work together. Okay, I hope you all know that Overdrive is available in all Wisconsin public libraries through the Wisconsin Public Library Consortium. Check your library's homepage. This library's homepage has Overdrive in the left-hand column towards the bottom of the front page. And you can download ebooks or audiobooks. Staff can help you if you don't know how.